Hi, it's Brett again, and we're back doing the Comfrey rub. This is part 2. Alright, so we've got the root in the mortar now. So what I'm going to do with this is I really just want to break it up into smaller pieces because these are still quite chunky. And to get it to soak into the oil so we get a nice oil, let's give this a good grind. Alright, so I'm just going to grind this up a bit. Just break into. If you don't have a mortar like this, you can always just crush it with a rolling pin. Try and break it up into smaller pieces. It's going to take a few minutes to do. You could do this in a blender if you've got a really good high-speed blender or a coffee grinder, but you just want to be careful not to make it too small because you don't want it to become a fine powder. If it becomes a fine powder, then it'll just turn into a big lump once you put it into the oil. And this is the difficulty you have with making a really good comfrey paste, is extracting as much as possible from the root without having the root stick together. It saved you some of the time watching me do this, but I've been grinding this for about the last 10 minutes. And I could have done it in a blender or a grinder, a bit quicker, but I like doing it this way. It's the old-fashioned way. And these roots are chopped up now. They're fairly fine, but still in little granules because you don't want it to be in a powder. If it's in a powder, then once you put it in the oil, it's just going to stick together. So little granules are ideal because what we want this to do is soak in the oil and for the active compound to come out into the oil. That's the allantoin. And so what I've got here is just some good cold pressed extra virgin olive oil, which I'm going to soak this in. Give this a good covering so that if it swells up at all in the oil, which it will, that remains covered. So I've put about as much oil over the top of the root as there is the root itself. So about twice as much oil as we've got root. And basically I'm just going to let this soak now. The herbs have been soaking in the oil now for about 3 weeks. I was going to do a couple of weeks, but I think the longer the better, so 3 weeks they've been soaking. And what I've done today is I've got the herbs on the boiler, so I've got a glass or a Pyrex dish, and underneath I've got some boiling water. So underneath here the water's boiling, it's heating up the Pyrex dish, and the herbs and the oil are in here soaking now, just warming through. So I'm leaving this for an hour or two, and then I'm going to move on to the next stage of making up the rub, which I will talk to you about as we go. Over here I've got a strainer and some muslin, so I'm going to put the oil into that. And down this end I've got my jars, and I've got some liquid herbs. Now you may not have liquid herbs like this, but you can get them from your local herbalist. And we're going to put those and measure them in and put them into the hot oil at some stage. So we'll get on with it. Okay, here we are. I've got the hot oil now, it's come off the stove. Still pretty warm. Going to remove this oil. You can see there's the root still there. You don't want to use water when you're cleaning anything with this because you don't want any water getting into the oil. So paper towel's an ideal way to clean things. Right, so what I want to do now is strain this oil back into the boiler. So I've just got a bit of muslin here. Just going to tie a knot on the end of it. Put this over the strainer. It's just an ordinary kitchen colander. Because we don't want any of this root coming through now, completely straining the root out. But we want to get every last drop of the oil out. Okay. Just get the last bits of this oil. Cocoa butter and beeswax are interchangeable, so you could use cocoa butter or beeswax, but today I'm using beeswax to mix into this. Okay, so we've strained off the liquid oil, and we've got about 250 mils. Now what I want to end up with is about 10% of the liquid herbs. So just for your own information, these liquid herbs I've got here are yarrow, gotu kola, ginger, arnica and bilberry. And all of these herbs are anti-inflammatory and healing, and they help with the process of healing damaged joints and tissues, and especially blood vessels and things like that. So I'm going to add these liquid herbs into the warm oil, and I'm actually going to heat this oil again. So now it's going to go back onto the double boiler. It's going to be heated again, and the reason I'm going to do that is because these liquid herbs are roughly 50% alcohol. I'm going to just warm it to evaporate the alcohol off, because we don't want to have the alcohol in the finished product. And we're just weighing this because we want to put about 1 part to 4, 1 part to 5. So we've got 275, so it's about 275 mils, 275 grams. So we want to add around about 50 to 75 grams of beeswax to this. So the thing with doing this is you want to do it quickly enough to, while the oil's hot, to dissolve your beeswax, but then get it into the jars before it thickens and cools, and end up with a nice smooth rub. So it can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to just grate this beeswax till it's nice and smooth, nice and fine, so that it dissolves quickly in the oil. Now this is definitely your tricky stage. You've got to be quick. So I'm just going to put this back on the boiler just for a couple of minutes, just to melt that beeswax. Yeah, so I'm just going to give this a little bit more warmth just to finish melting off that beeswax. So I've put it in about 1 to 5, 1 part beeswax to 5 parts oil, so it's a matter of just measuring it out, weighing it off, getting your proportions right. There's about 10% of the liquid herbs to the percentage of oil as well. Okay, we've just warmed that through again just to melt that beeswax right down. Now what the thing is here is to keep stirring this and keep an eye on it, keep a close eye on it, so that everything stays nicely mixed as it cools. And just before things go into solid, we don't want to pour it straight into the jars as a liquid, or we'll get some sediment settling out as the dried herbs, the liquid herbs settle out, and we don't want that to happen. And any tiny particles of root, we don't want it all to sink to the bottom. So if we pour it in the jars like a liquid as it is now, we'll end up with everything settling to the bottom. It won't be nice and consistent. So we've got to catch this just before it solidifies and get it into the jars. Okay, so I've just transferred this while it's still quite warm into a pouring jug, and also done a little test. So just get a spoon and get a tiny bit of the oil, and it will cool really quickly, and you'll see the sort of consistency you're going to end up with. And it needs to be just a soft soft paste that you can easily break down. It doesn't want to be hard like wax. It wants to be soft so that you can actually break it down and rub it in. So you can test it a little bit, and if it's too hard, you put too much beeswax in it. So it always pays to be a bit light on the beeswax to start with, and if it's too soft you can always add more. But it's a bit difficult if you put too much beeswax in to take it out. So always start on the lighter side, so maybe 1 part to 5, and if you need more beeswax you can gradually increase it. Okay, you can see it's just starting to go a bit cloudy. Just starting to go a little bit cloudy, and all of a sudden it's going to set. So I have to be really quick now, because if it starts to set, see, it's just gone a little bit cloudy, just a little bit off colour, and so that means it will hold everything in suspension quite nicely. It's nicely going to emulsify. And if I walked away for a couple of minutes now, that would start setting in the jar, and we'd have to go back and put it on the heater again, put it on the burner again to heat it up. So I'm just going to get it into the jars now. You can see that's actually changed colour immediately, and you can see how it's almost set, started to set on the jug itself. So I better use that for a few nights. So there you go. Hope you can see that. I'll get in a bit closer so you can have a look. So there you go. These are big jars, by the way. These are 200 gram jars. So if you were using 50 gram jars, you'd probably make yeah, like 8 pots out of that. But what I like to do is have a big 200 gram jar. That's going to last me over a year, maybe 2 years. Just putting a little bit on every time you have a bath, rub it on the back or whatever. If you've got varicose veins or aching legs, rub it on those joints and that sort of thing. Just an amazing product. Yeah, so there you go, making our Comfrey rub. It took us a couple of weeks, 3 weeks in fact, but I hope it was worth the wait, and hopefully you've got enough ingredients at home to make it yourself and really enjoy the process, and I hope it helps you and you can help other people with it. So thanks for watching, hope to talk to you soon.